Hello and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. My name is John Gardner and I'm the Director of Title IX and Training here at ATSU, and I'm very excited to be with you today for today's show. Today we're going to talk about medicinal plants and gardens. Today you can join us on our Facebook page where you have the opportunity to ask questions, post those questions, they'll get sent over to me and I'll post those to our guests today. Additionally, you can watch us on live stream where you can also post questions there and those will get sent over as well, and we'll ask them during the show. If you really enjoy the show and want to watch it again, we encourage you to join us on YouTube or tell a friend about the show and have them watch it on YouTube later. I'm really pleased to welcome our guest today. Our guest is Jason Haxton. Jason is the Director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine. Welcome, Jason.
It's great to be here. I've done a show before, and you guys are so fun, and it's great to be with our ATSU community and sharing information. We have a wonderful museum, founded in 1834 by A.T. Still's daughter, with over 150,000 artifacts, and we're worldwide. We're the only museum of the profession, and we're going to talk about one of our exhibits, the garden exhibit, because gardens are museums, as are zoos or aquatic centers. Botanical gardens, so it's amazing, that we get to have our little exhibit on the natural wildlife of Kirksville.
Well, I'm really excited to hear more about the gardens and medicinal plants. I'm also excited just to be here with Jason. Jason is sort of the storyteller at ATSU, and I think somewhat the storyteller of osteopathic medicine. And so, Jason, before we get into the specifics on some of the plants, which I see you have a few in front of you today, so I'm a little excited and a little terrified to see what we may do with those later. But before we get into sort of the plants and the specifics of them and the garden itself, can you talk a little bit about the history of osteopathic medicine and how that ties into plants and medicine?
Yeah, I think so, because if we had Dr. Still here, who himself was a great storyteller, Dr. Still says, the reason I tell stories is I could use the scientific terms and anatomy, but if I tell a story, people pay attention and they get to the message that I want to have. So it gets my point across, and that's why I do it. So in many ways, I try to learn from Dr. Still's storytelling because it is a great way of learning information easily. And our students and faculty love to take a break because it really is just a pleasure to learn about osteopathy. As Dr. Still would say, if we want to know about something, we have to go before the thing itself. So if you want to know about osteopathy, you got to get a little bit ahead of and behind Dr. Still, and that would take us to his father, Abram. Now, Abram was a privileged man. Don't be scared by the photograph.
He does look fairly serious there.
The original cast for the Walking Dead. There's a reason he looks like that. In 1850, you would have to pose and not move for a full 3 minutes. So they'd stick a metal rod up your back with a little pillow, tell you to lean against it, and now lock your eyes, lock your mouth, and not move for 3 minutes. Unfortunately, he shifted his hand, and so you can see what would happen. You get a little blurriness. So again, but Abram, you look at his deep-set eyes, his high cheekbones, he is actually American Indian through his mother, Mary Lida. And that came from Anna Wilkinson, her mother, both identified in the census. And so he has strong American Indian features, and he was from a privileged family with 13 siblings on a plantation up in North Carolina. Okay. Having the wealth, he was able to go to a medical school for what it was in that time period in the early 1800s. 6 months to 9 months, you learn how to blister, meaning basically burn somebody and pop the blister, bleed them. Unfortunately, that's what happened to our first president, George Washington, had strep throat, and they bled him until he ran out of blood. Oh. So basically, George Washington was murdered at the age of 66 by his physicians. Physicians, just like Abram was training to be. So bleeding, blistering, poisoning. If you're sick, giving you some arsenic, mercury, cyanide, let's kill the disease. Usually you killed your patient. If you didn't, you deformed them. So, and if nothing else works, just dose them with enough opioids that they don't know they're ill. And that's a problem that we're seeing today. Dr. Still said there's way too much prescription drugs for opiates, even at his time. And his idea was using a healthy approach. We could do better. So Abram was trained in plants because there was no Walgreens or pharmacies close by and very few doctors. So most people might have their own little book of remedies and find the herbs that would work in their area. And so he gets trained as a doctor. He comes back to the plantation, and he realized while he was away during that time that the institution of slavery is a pretty bad thing. And he has a heart-to-heart with his dad, and he goes, Boaz, I just can't, I just think this slavery is really a bad idea. I've been hearing about this guy, John Wesley. He has this new idea of Protestant faith where we take care of people, we help the children, we provide medicine, and I don't think we're doing that. And Boaz's attitude was like, yeah, don't let the door hit you on the way out. So Abram was like, well, then I'm leaving the family. And not only did Abram leave, but 2 or 3 of his brothers. So here we have John Wesley, and who basically said, what we need to do is not have churches. We need to go to our congregation, the most needy in the wild, and you come to them and you heal their bodies. So we want doctors, but then you heal the spirit. So we want to train you in religion and spirituality. And this is a theme that we see in osteopathy today, the body and the spirit, and working with those in harmony. So A.T. Still gets this through his father, who gets it through John Wesley. So he's out circuit riding around to his basically congregation.
So this is Abram, and where was he doing this? Was this in the Midwest? Was this still pretty far out east? Or?
Initially, he came from North Carolina to Virginia.
Okay.
And the issue that Abram had is wherever he would go and preach and doctor, if slavery started to come into power, whenever there was a little bit of money, then he'd move to the next rural site, because when everybody's poor, there's no slaves. And so as he moved from North Carolina to Virginia, down to Newmarket, Tennessee, and eventually the church got tired of moving him away from slaves, and so he basically, comes to Missouri, and it's another conflict. And so finally they said, look, we're going to move you to the Shawnee Indians. There will be no slavery there. But the Shawnee got sick and they moved out of town also. So again, Abram's being moved around because of his values. And he's an abolitionist, as is the whole family. And he's picking up little remedies. You see, what John Wesley said in his book is that if you want to know how to stay well, when you go to a new population, ask the local people, the indigenous. So if you guys come up from Mesa to Kirksville and you get the Kirksville crud, ask us. We can tell you there's no cure. No, but we know the diseases and we know how to get you better. As a matter of fact, we'll probably give you a little bit of bone set, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But the idea is, what John Wesley said is talk to the local people. In this case, it would be the indigenous American Indians, and they usually will know about the things and diseases and way to use the plants. So all these preacher doctors would have gospel handwritten notes with little remedies for things like white fever, which in those days was tuberculosis, consumption, and what you could do to, if not remedy, at least to gain some comfort. And so we see that A.T. Still is picking up all these ideas about plants and natural healing. Now, what we know about medicine and food and plants from the Chinese is that the word for medicine and the word for food is the same. And so we see Dr. Still moving in his form of osteopathy as a design towards health. Your diet, your exercise, your mental health, and a little manipulation if things are out of adjustment so the health flows in and the waste flows out. So all these are building around this very natural form. You know, when you put a substance from nature in your body, it blends and works with the body. What Dr. Still says is typically when you bring a drug in, the body is reacting, not acting with. And so it's another reason why we might look at some of the plants that are involved.
So what are some examples of some of those plants that maybe they would find back then, and how would they get a collection of them and store them somewhere? Would they dry them out? Would they just kind of pick them up wherever they were? How was that all managed? Well,
and that's the thing is a lot of things could be made as a tea. And that's where you literally will dry it and you just put it in the water and you drink it and it releases the properties that way for healing. However, there's something called a tincture, and that's one of my favorites. For instance, here is one plant. It is called bone set. Now, it's not for broken bones, but bone set is actually because when you have the flu, it's an antiviral. When you have the flu, you feel achy and all sorts. So when you take the bone set tea, your bone locks back into its normal formation, or in theory, your whole body feels back to normal. Hence the term bone set. Now, it's an easy plant to find because the leaves go east, west, north, south, all the way up. And it's one full leaf across. Now, a friend of ours, we have a donor, she helps us buy the catalog every year, which, by the way, we give these out for free, but she gives us through the Freeman Foundation the money to provide these. So if you're in Mesa or you're in Kirksville, you can come down to the museum or send us an email and we'll send it through campus mail all the way down to Arizona if you like. But it actually shows and talks about all the different plants that we have in the garden. So these are basically Missouri weeds. Of course, a weed is a plant that you don't know its purpose. Boneset, as an antiviral, you could put in vodka. That's a high potent alcohol. After 3 months, it'll pull out the medicinal qualities. And so then you can actually just take a tablespoon of the juice of the boneset and vodka, put it in orange juice, have a morning screwdriver, and basically you're set against the flu.
There you go.
Now, we laugh about that, but elderberry, another antiviral. Dark berries are good antivirals. This is why elderberry wine. So if you drink wine and you're an old wino, the reason you're an old wino is you've got protection against the flu. The number one killer of old people, flu that turns into pneumonia. If you're drinking your wine, you've got an antiviral, you'll live to be old, and an old drunkard at that. So anyway, just teasing, but those are the plants that we might look at. So I'm gonna pass this over to you. Now you don't want to eat that because I tried it. It is really bitter.
It's really bitter.
Anything that bad has to be good for you. But typically you'll squeeze to get the resin out, and then you can snip. We'll talk
This
about.
one doesn't smell too bad.
No, it doesn't. It tastes.
But when you eat it, it's terrible.
It is, or make it into a tea. We're going to give that to. We have a staff member that's not doing so well, so they're going to get that. Now here's another plant. Now this is not what you think it is. Don't count those leaves. This is tansy, and tansy is a slight poison. Tansy, when you squeeze the leaves and take a whiff, it is something you would not want to put in your mouth because it's a mild poison. Now, why would we want a mild poison? By the way, nothing in our garden will hurt you, but a mild poison will kill the parasites. Oh, you'll vomit. Yes, you may get diarrhea, but any parasites that are within your intestinal tracts, worms and stuff, it will clear out. And so you need a mild poison. In order for you to really hurt yourself, you'd have to eat the entire bush, and trust me, in our garden, you wouldn't be able to do it. So that's our tansy. Now that I've tortured your nose with something that smells really bad, this is after work. This is my favorite, lemon balm. And when you take lemon balm, and after work I'll grab a leaf and typically squeeze to release the oils. Oh gosh, it is so amazing. It will help relax you and put you to sleep. So a little of lemon balm, isn't that? Squeeze.
Much. I didn't mind those so much, but now it's comparison. This is much better.
I just take 2 leaves, scroll them, stick them up my nose, and leave work. It's like I'm great.
You're all good to go.
I'm good to go. I'm relaxed after a long day, and so we'll probably have everybody at ATSU out there looking for the lemon balm. But it is an amazing plant to relax you, to help you sleep at night, and really take off the stress. One of the last things that I have in here is basically one of the first plants that comes up. And it's basically catnip, or it's a kind of a mint. And of course, it's great for a breath freshener. So you can chew a little bit on our catnip.
No, let's have a bite.
Yeah, gives you fresh breath. It's used as a tonic, gets everything flowing and moving in your body. And it's not too bad.
No.
Those are just some of the hundreds of Missouri weeds that we have in our medicinal garden. And so my thought about this is, there are a lot of great plants. And as John Wesley said, learn from the indigenous people. When the American Indian women were giving birth and going into labor, the male husbands and Indians would go to the willow tree and pull off the bark, and the women would chew on the bark. And it's, I think it's salinicide, which is basically the basis for aspirin.
So it's a pain reliever.
It's a pain reliever. And people with chronic headaches and pain, actually it's recommended as a natural chemical for if you're going to be on something all the time for pain, then willow bark is actually recommended as a very natural way to help you. And so we've learned a lot from American Indians about medicine and things. Tamiflu. There is, we know for as an antiviral on flu, Tamiflu actually comes from star anise, which is licorice.
Okay.
Comes out of Japan and China. Kind of a little ball that comes on like a juniper tree, real alkaloid. They would for years use that as an antiviral, just like our little bit of boneset. But they were able to make it in the lab. And once you could recreate it in the lab, you could sell it for $100 for 10 pills. I've bought it before. And so the difference is with our boneset, it's free, and it would do the exact same thing as an antiviral. However, the pharmaceutical companies are not going to research Boneset because it's free. You probably couldn't process star anise to get the Tamiflu medicine, so they're safe in providing that that is the only recommended antiviral. But there's a lot of good plants. Now there's a lot of things in this book that was just crazy talk back in the day, like curing tuberculosis.
Right.
Now that doesn't. There are ways to treat it, but nothing in this book I don't think would take care. However, quinine, basically rose hips and stuff, things that would help you with the Black Plague, actually were things that they knew about and recommended as natural plants. So.
Well, that's fascinating stuff. Let's. What we're going to do is we're going to take a couple-minute break. We're going to show you a short video on multi-factor identification and how that all works and the value of it. And we'll come back with more stories from Jason about what's going on with our garden here at ATSU, and also maybe some more historical stories, just because I love to hear those about AT Still and all the things in the past. So we'll see you in a couple minutes.
Hey, this is Ben, your friendly neighborhood tech here, and today we're going to be covering multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA. Now I know you guys are wondering, what is MFA? And that is a great question. Have you ever been to the bank and used an ATM? Then you've used MFA. Anytime you've used an ATM, you've had to use your card and also had to enter in your PIN. Using those two things right there are two different forms of authentication, and there you have it. You've used MFA. Crazy, right? Now, I know you guys are wondering, you keep saying this, Ben, but what is it? And that's a great question. So multi-factor authentication is something that requires you to use two different forms of authentication in order for you to access any sort of personal information. So the three things are something you have, like your ATM card, something you know, like your PIN, and something you are, like your fingerprint. So for instance, going back to the bank, say you have to go sign into your bank in order to access your account information. So you'll go online on your computer, you'll put in your username and password. That's something you know. Now from there, you'll have to put in something extra in order for you to access your information. Now I know you guys are thinking, what about a second password? That's two of the same thing. That's not going to work. So normally what will happen is you'll get a text, and that text will require you to enter in a PIN in order for you to get to your information. Right there is your second form, and now you're able to sign in. And now the good thing about multi-factor authentication is if you've used the device once before, say your cell phone or your computer, usually the banks have something in place that recognizes the device location and allows you to sign in again without having to do that extra step each and every single time. So I know you guys are wondering, what's the big deal? Why do we need this? So what MFA does is it actually puts an extra layer of security on top of any personal information. So that way the bad guys will have to have not only your password, but now they have to have your cell phone or a computer or something else in order for them to access your personal information. Now let's be realistic here. You guys would definitely recognize if your cell phone was missing and you were reported to the police before the bad guys would have a chance to be able to sign in and get your information. Now let's be realistic. Stopping all online crime is unrealistic, just not realistic at all. But with multi-factor authentication enabled, it's going to make it a lot harder. So I say today, if you know how to do it, start today. You want to use it basically anytime you have any sort of personal data that you want to make sure is secure. So again, like your online banking, health information, things like that, you want to make sure that you enable multi-factor authentication immediately. Multi-factor authentication should be rolling out to us pretty soon here, and if you guys have any questions at all, contact us here at IT. We'll be able to answer all your questions and be able to help you guys out. This has been your friendly neighborhood tech, Ben, signing off.
Hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the short video on multi-factor authentication. Again, I'm John Gardner, and I'm here with Jason Haxton, the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine, and we're talking about medicinal plants and gardens. And Jason, behind us is a picture of the cabin that I think we have in front of the museum. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe the history of that cabin, what it was and what it is and how it serves us now?
That is, it's often been identified as Dr. Still's birth cabin, and we've been doing more research which maybe puts that into a little bit of doubt. It could be, but maybe it couldn't be, and there's a reason why there is that doubt. Most people start off with a starter home. You might begin in an apartment or a trailer, and then you move up to something big, you know, and your starter home, and then you go maybe up to your larger home. Around here, we have a huge Amish population, and they will begin by living in a trailer, all like 8 or 9 of them in a trailer. And then they will build a workshop, and they all move into the workshop as their home. Eventually, that'll be where they have a little cottage industry. Maybe they make cabinets, maybe they sell groceries. Then they build a basement, and they move from the workshop to the basement of their home. And now they're living in the basement, running their shop, and then they build the first and second story, and eventually they're living in the whole home.
Yeah.
So as we look at Abrams Still, it's about 1918, and he's in Virginia, and he builds a cabin. And he has 2 boys ahead of A.T. Still. First there's Ed, and then there's James, and the third child is Andrew Taylor. And so we're not sure if Andrew was actually born in this cabin, because he then builds a bigger cabin and has additional children, and there's like a run through the 2 of them. And so this has been identified as the doc's apothecary. So it was where he would treat people, the doctor's shop. And so that's why there's a little bit of doubt. We know that Dr. Still was certainly influenced by being around his father. And of course, you don't bring sick patients into your home. So by having the apothecary of the shop, you could treat or help people next to your house without them being in your family. And so it is a fascinating first and something that was taken apart log by log from Virginia, put on a train, and brought to Kirksville.
So it was a Lincoln log situation.
It was building Lincoln logs.
All
Now
right.
here's the cool thing. A.T. Still was born in 1828. So in 1926, they find the cabin, they drag it here, and in 1928, 100 years from his birth, they celebrate by unveiling the cabin.
Wow.
It was also the last time the AOA was in Kirksville. Now the population of Kirksville was about 5,000, and the population of AOA was about 8,000. There was a little bit of problem. Everybody in Kirksville was required to take somebody in. But I mean, I'm just thinking, even today, would you want to, I mean, it's just like, hi, I'm moving into your house for the week.
Right.
And so that is why basically that was the last time that we actually had the AOA here. What's interesting is A.T. Still was good friends with Thomas Edison, and they hung out together, and they did experiments together, and Edison recorded A.T. Still's voice. And in 1928, it was on a little cylinder with a phonograph. They played, and A.T. Still was talking, and everybody in the Journal of Oz, how great it was to hear Dr. Still's voice again. Now, we've got a little movie. If you go to YouTube and you type in A.T. Still, you can see A.T. Still in 3D, nodding his head and clapping, and he's talking to a bunch of people. But to actually hear his voice, which was supposed to be deep and husky and projected, somewhere out there, it existed in 1928. If we can find his voice, that to me would be one of the Raiders of the Lost Ark treasures, you know, the Ark of the Covenant. It's A.T. Still's voice on a cylinder. So we have a lot of cool stuff we're looking for and cool stuff we're finding. Yesterday, we're going through some photographs, and there's a picture of the interior of A.T. Still's mansion. Now, we've never seen the interior of A.T. Still's mansion. Even though it exists, he didn't let people into the privacy. Now, this was after it had been turned into a nursing home, but it was just as it was. And when they tore it down in 1968, the students ran over there and they pulled off pieces of it, banisters, and there's these little medallions of sunflowers. And in the picture, that is the newel post that goes up from the staircase. And there are those sunflowers that 2 weeks ago we received from a student that graduated back in 68, 69, and had raided the mansion before it went down, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's fascinating. So this cabin is just outside the museum here in Kirksville, and so it's something you can walk in and kind of see, and you guys have it set up how you sort of imagine it would be.
And it is, and it does show what it was on the frontier. And the importance of the cabin, as I mentioned, A.T. Still got to see his father doing doctoring, but also he got to watch nature. And it's nature that osteopathy comes from. As you observe nature, we learn to live in harmony. We remove ourselves. We get in our little areas. We have our antibacterial soaps. We take our antibiotics. You know, we don't want to go out in nature. Dr. Still says, no, 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 no. We're products of nature. We need to get out every day and commune. And so the garden that we've created as an exhibit gives a location for people to commune with the plants and nature. As Dr. Still says, you need it every single day for good health. And so Dr. Still observed that animals, they eat when they're hungry. They sleep when they're tired. They stretch before they actually exercise, which is kind of a form of manipulation. Because we should be more like animals, but we don't. We don't eat what we're supposed to. We don't exercise. We don't have tranquility with our surroundings, and we get things out of alignment. He goes, and those things alone will take you a long ways in health. And so this is where some of the ideas of osteopathy comes from, looking at A.T. Still's view of nature. Now, he says long-lived animals eat few things and not very much. So he saw food as fuel, and you take a little bit of it all day long. Now, the funny thing, he says, think of our body. We create things like our body, a pot-belly stove. That is just our stomach. He goes, now, to get energy out of your stomach or the pot-belly stove, we get a log, we put it in, we light it up, it burns, it releases energy, voila. You shake out the ashes, you're ready for a new log. That's how food should be. But you shove that furnace, that pot-belly stove full of wood, and then you try to burn it up, it burns too hot, it burns indirectly, you get big clunkers, you can't shake it out. That's what we're doing to our bodies when we have a buffet. Dr. Still was anti-buffet. At Christmas time, he goes, oh my gosh, we eat so much, the blood can't even circulate in our body. But he also says, everything in moderation is okay. And his vices were tobacco, chocolate, and whiskey. And he would rotate his vices because in moderation, everything's okay.
Everything was all right.
But if we come into the garden, we get to see some of the sculpture. Now, this curiosity is created just for, at a huge expense, for the garden itself. And we also have a plaque that actually represents Dr. Still and a quote where he says, make yourself a child of nature and basically curiosity that basically learn as a child would learn, that we should keep that childlike quality to ourselves. So I do find that the sculpture is a way of giving us visual food for the spirit, as well as food for nourishment. And so it is a great place to come and relax. And you can see we identified the different plants that correspond then to the catalog.
So one of the things about this garden is that it's not about beautiful flowers. It's not about things that have been transplanted. You talk about the concept of weeds, and that these are natural components of our environment. Can you talk a little bit about that and that concept?
Well, the good thing about the medicinal garden is it always comes back up because these are invasive species. Their job is to take over. So every year we're actually fighting keeping them in their spot. And as a result of our medicinal garden, the campus has a lot more weeds across in its other manicured gardens. The gardeners on campus are always like, well, what is this? Where does this cup plant come from? It's like, and they, of course, they know that we're just spreading our seeds all through campus. But the good thing about it is they are actually very beautiful. We have designed them in such a way that, again, that it brings kind of like a Zen way of meditation and quality. So students can come out and relax and eat and have a meal or wait for someone to pick them up. It's used by the hospital patients as well as family members. While they're waiting for a procedure, they can come over. The garden is really a great place to commune. One other weird thing I discovered, when my son was in 4-H and had to do a project on bugs, that because all these plants represent the species across all of Missouri, what ends up happening is that all the bugs related to that plant appear. So on flax, there's a super neat little tiny beetle that has created its own ecosystem. So you can find every bug of Missouri along with every plant. So it's kind of a fun place to go and look and spy.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and it's something I've just gotten here in October as a new employee, and so I haven't actually seen it in its full glory, but I suppose it's coming up now.
Yes.
It's sort of the process. That's very cool. How long has it been here?
Okay, so this actually was started before I began. It was 21 years ago, and it was actually called kind of as a meditation thing, the third eye, that it was something in your mind, kind of a very spiritual place. The next president didn't like that, so that name went away. So we are now the Medicinal Garden. It was a little bit too far off. But the great thing about it was that it had a rough start. As a matter of fact, everything just grew as one giant weed pit. And there was a little a pond that someone just dug out a hole and stuck a black plastic bag in. It was very dangerous, and because you would probably appreciate that we didn't, with compliancy, we didn't want somebody falling in and breaking a leg or drowning.
Yes.
I think the saddest moment in the garden was the day that someone found a rabbit in the pond. It's like, it's like a dead.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, the pond has to go. But again, the thing about it is, we have continued to learn about and grow the garden, and it started as a smaller plot and has expanded to where it is today, a really major exhibit. And it was the first, actually, unlike Mesa, which has a gorgeous campus, it was really one of our first forays into making our campus look a little prettier. Back in those days, we were an asphalt parking lot. It's almost like if our students had to walk more than 10 feet to get in the building, they'd die of a cardiac arrest or something. It's like, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to be healthy? Shouldn't we walk and shouldn't we commune with nature? And so our grounds have become so much more beautiful, and we like to think the garden started us on that path.
So we got a few extra steps in there. So we did have a question. One of the viewers is asking about, can you go over some of the plants that you've mentioned just one more time in terms of what they are, what their names are, and kind of what purpose they serve just one more time for some of our viewers?
Yeah, and I think that's fun. And so actually, and though I wouldn't recommend it, tansy is a slight poison. And as a result, it basically is a plant that smells like kerosene. So usually in a field, that's the thing, most animals won't eat this. However, it is good at killing parasites. So if you had worms and you were on the frontier and you had nothing else, this would basically take care of that in small doses. The pills that you get from the pharmacy for worms, they also make you vomit and have diarrhea, so they serve about the same purpose. My favorite plant when I walk is called boneset. And boneset, again, helps you get back from the flu. It is an antiviral, so not just flu, but any kind of viral this could work with. And it has leaves that go north, south, east, west, all the way up. Very bitter. We had our donor who gives us the money for the Terry Crandall, and she gives us money for the catalog out of her father's foundation. And we're in the garden. She goes, "Have you ever tried boneset just as a leaf?" And it's like, "No." And she pinches off a leaf and she goes, and she goes, "Here." And I thought, and it's the nastiest tasting thing.
Not good, huh?
Well, anything that would kill viruses has to be amazingly bad to taste. So, and then of course, the other things that we have again are the catmint, and it looks just like what we call lemon balm. And lemon balm is a natural relaxant. Catmint is, besides a breath mint, is also a good tonic. Again, the first thing you use in spring to get your juices and bloods and everything moving through your body. But there are hundreds of plants. Sage. Sage we use for cooking today, but you can take sage and basically you can put it with a little bit of either cell fat. You can boil up some plants and get some fat off the plants, because plants have fat just as animals do, and rub it into the sage, and you've got basically Vicks Vapor Rub. And so we have allspice, and it smells like all the spices. Lavender, again, another thing that's a relaxing quality to it. So as we go through, we've got wild grapevine. Again, dark berries are good antivirals.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about with this is, I think these are really great examples that I didn't know anything about in terms of things you can get naturally to sort of address if you're not feeling well and things like that. But I think one of the things I'm thinking about is things like farmers markets and locally sourced foods and things like that. That seems like that would be something that could be important too about how you sort of prepare your body for health.
And I think that's one of the benefits of living in a rural area like Kirksville is we have access to food that we can actually see grown and actually seeing, if you're into the meats, where the produce comes from. And so we're fortunate that farmers market starts in May, and we all live for that. And it goes until everything dies. So if we have a long, what we call an Indian summer where just winter never comes in till the end of October, they'll just keep showing up until things freeze, and then it's done pretty much. We also have a place called Take Root Cafe. It is an interesting concept because it's a natural foods, local foods, and it's pay what you can for your dinner. Nobody should go without a meal. So if you walk into Take Root and you have no money, there is the giving tree. It's painted with little tokens, like little round coins, and you can pull off a token and go forward and you can order a meal. Now, how they get those tokens is when your food comes to you, you're told what it costs, and you can pay that cost or whatever you have. Or you can pay a little extra, and those that pay a little extra, you don't tip, but you pay the extra, that goes into more giving tree tokens. And so it's beautiful. We have real chefs working with local produce. Now, here's what's cool. We've got a culinary school up in Iowa, and they need to do an internship. So those future chefs come down to Take Root Cafe, and they learn the recipes, they produce stuff, they get their foot whipped, and we continue to get great cooks and chefs food, and they get the educational experience to go on in life. So it's just this wonderful process, a beautiful cycle.
I didn't know that's how it worked. I didn't know that's how the chefs came. That's wonderful. And I hear, the other thing I hear is we're getting a new executive director of Take Root, so maybe there'll be some other new exciting things happening there. What about, is there anything, speaking to our Mesa campus, anything about that environment, any foods down there that are natural that you find that maybe we could speak to them about?
Well, good. Of course, again, every environment, as Dr. Still would say, has some kind of food that can help you. And one of the good ones that you guys have is actually the prickly pear off the cactus. Now, I'm a native Texan, born in Abilene, grew up in West Texas, so it's just more desert. And about the only thing that grows out there besides prickly pears are tarantulas and scorpions. As a child, I didn't realize the bugs I collected weren't like the butterfly collections and moths that everybody else had. I would have basically my pit of black widow spiders, scorpions, and tarantulas. I am not joking. And then I would actually figure out how to put them in some kind of a resin, and I'd make paperweights.
Right.
My parents still have paperweights
with scorpions
of black widow spiders, just like you put on your
amazing.
desk, and scorpions. Yeah, so we had the prickly pear, and my grandmother, Czech immigrant, so I'm all for immigration, and so she being a Czech immigrant, great-grandma never learned English, which is pretty funny. And so I do love to go to Prague and Czechoslovakia. So my grandma's used to being a frontiers person herself. You can always make food out of something. She could always make a jam. And so she comes to West Texas, and besides the rattlesnake roundups and the prickly pears, it's about that time, blooming time in Arizona. So I'm sure right now the cactus, if you get a good rain, are in full bloom. And then once the bloom goes away, then that little pod turns red or purple, and that is the fruit. Okay. And so my grandma said, I'm going to turn that into food. She goes, you get out there. So I got on these gloves and some toothbrushes, and I brushed off all the thorns, because even though you can't see them, there are thorns. So we brushed off all these thorns on the prickly pear, and then we got a big 5-gallon bucket full of them. Around here, what we have are morels this time of year. Once it's wet and things, the morel mushroom, can't mistake it. Throw it in a little egg and flour batter, fry it up, and everything's good. So anyway, we get this bucket of basically prickly pear, and she boils them down, and then she adds pectin or whatever you do to make basically a jam, and we end up with this amazing jam and candy. And so again, and I'm sure you can buy that in Arizona. It is supposed to have very healthy qualities for you. It's just like aloe vera plant. Aloe vera plant, basically, which is again a succulent out of the desert, can help with rheumatism. It oils up your joints. It helps for digestion. So these are qualities that we can find in plants everywhere. So if I were out in Mesa, we'd probably have our own little medicinal garden of native plants, and we would ask the locals, what do you use and what do we need? And we could have that there. But we do welcome, we'd love for you guys to come and connect to your history up in Mesa. So make a trip and come up and see us.
All right, Jason, this is a little bit off topic, but I got
Okay.
to ask this question.
There it is.
It's since we have you captive, this question has come in. Is it true that the parking lot behind the TBR building is filled with old medical equipment?
That is a good question. So, where we have our big brick research building, and at the very top we have alligators and snakes, because we're studying, how can an alligator sit in a putrid environment and not get sick? We want what alligators have, immunity. And they're doing other things with alligators. So, and same with venom. We find the bee stings for palsies and different things, that Parkinson's. They're finding that the venom is actually having a calming effect on the nervous system. And so we've always done cool research here. So when they were going to build the Timken-Burnett building, which basically has its relationships to Tesla.
Okay.
So they're all one crazy family of scientists, the Burnetts and the Timkens, and so anyway, needless to say, we get this money to build this place. A.T. Still's physicians are dealing with the Rockefeller's kids and the kid's deaf. And using manipulation and working with the muscles and bones, the kid is able to hear. They're like, here's $500,000. Back in 1960, $500,000 meant something. And so it's like, well, that was nice. I said, you know what? Here's another $500,000. And we built our research center based on what we had done to help the Rockefeller family, which was pretty cool. So we had this amphitheater, this big pit, where back in Dr. Still's day, they'd have rodeo shows, and they would basically have, little productions, and horses ride right in, and everybody would cheer and clap in this natural pit that sat behind the school. And so they decided, we're going to cement this thing in. So they started putting cement in, but then World War II came up in 1938, 39. Thought, we don't have the money for the cement. So this place basically is half finished. So it lingers until the 1960s. And that's when they said, okay, it's time to freshen up. We're going to build our new research center, and that's when the Timken-Burnett building went up, and we're going to throw all the old crap into the pit. And so actually they took off the front half of the school and all the bricks and all the taxidermy that Dr. Still loved, because he loved to show the diversity of nature. All the bearskin rugs, all the peacock, everything went into the pit and was covered up. And so, yeah, there's probably quite a treasure trove that someday, if we dig back down into it, we'll find. But a lot of it's just bricks.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, okay, going back to the garden. So now my understanding is maybe there's been some expansion, and maybe you're doing some work around Dr. Still's grave as well.
Yes, so you bring up a good point. So actually, we've extended the garden to some degree to A.T. Still's burial site. Remember, he lost his son Fred first. Fred was just like him, very curious about nature. And he's in the barn working with these perchons, these big Belgian massive farm horses. And A.T. Still's like, hey, Fred, leave the horses alone. And A.T. Still runs off to a dinner party. And while he's at a dinner party, he stands up and says, oh my God, my Fred is dead. And Fred had been crushed against the barn by one of these massive horses. And the injury was basically life-threatening, and he dies from that. He dies on graduation day of the first class of osteopathy. So they graduate, but they don't celebrate in honor of Fred. So it's an interesting story. So when you're up at the gravesite, you get to see Fred, and then his wife dies in 1910. And Dr. Still said, after her death, I just didn't have any ambition to do anything new. Up to that point, he was writing books and inventing, and after that point, he just kind of slows down. And then he himself dies 7 years later in 1917. So we've got the three of them. So we've put up a redbud tree, some natural environments. We've made it a nice place also to go and commute. And a lot of people like to go and visit, as the Europeans call it, the tomb. We call it the gravesite, but it's the tomb of Dr. Still. And so it is a very peaceful place. And it looks on the only osteopathy street in the world. So the international people like to do that. They like to stare at Osteopathy Street, which was originally called Brown Street, but then changed to Osteopathy when Dr. Still builds the school in the mansion.
Very cool.
Farmer Brown.
Well, we're getting closer to the end of our time. You're such a great storyteller. I just want to turn it over to you and just say, tell us some great stories, maybe some new stuff you found out, or some of the great historical stories about either Dr. Still or the school.
I think for our Mesa campus, and we get to go down there a lot because you do have a more indigenous American Indian population, which again, Missouri was actually, though we had the Blackfoot, the Sauk, and the Fox, no tribe really stayed here. It was kind of like the grocery store. So everybody would come into Missouri, shop around for berries and wildlife and get all their produce and their meats, and then they leave. And so we really don't have an Indian population that is really here. And so what A.T. Still says, my first lessons in osteopathy, I watched how the American Indians would basically set hips using a horse. You'd tie the leg of the injured hip to the tail of the pony. You would straddle a tree with your leg attached to a pony, and then you smack the horse to pull it into place. And Dr. Still said, sometimes it got fixed, and sometimes the leg came off. He goes, that was frontier medicine with a vengeance. But it got him thinking that we could put things back into place, and he became very popular when he could do it without a pony.
That's a wild story. What else? Give us a couple more.
Okay, another story is, now here's an interesting thing. A.T. Still's mama, Martha, being out here in the wilds, and again, no pharmacy, no doctors, they had contained a bacterium that both the American Indians of the Shawnee had, and their children playing with them, they were educating them and teaching them. Their eyes started bleeding. It was a horrible infection, one that was literally causing their eyes to bleed, and she was fearful that they would lose their eyesight. And she was thinking, what can we do?
Yeah.
And she got this idea. She went to her kitchen and she started making some dough, and she basically got the dough ready and shoved it into the oven and made bread. And when that bread came out, she had a fresh linen towel. She brought it out. She sterilized her knife, and then she cleanly cut the bread into slices. With that bread, hot, piping hot and fresh and sterile, they went down to the cow. They'd just given birth to a calf and put the milk of the cow on the bread, and they soaked their eyes. The antibacterial qualities that are transferred from the cow to the calf also were transferred and cleaned up the eye infection.
Wow.
It's an interesting story, but if you come up here, we've got Amish stores and communities and things where you can actually buy from the Amish. And I was out with the Amish a couple years ago, and one of the girls had a pretty bad case of pink eye. I said, hey, tell you what, Noah, do you want me to go in? I'll get you some sulfur drops. You know, that's what we use. We'll clear it up like that. He goes, oh, no. We'll take care of it. I thought, what are they going to do? So I basically come back out in a week, and her eyes are all cleared up. I said, well, what did you do? Mama made some bread. We cut it into slices. We got fresh cow milk. We soaked it. She's fine. They never met the Stills, and yet almost 200 years later, these things that are passed on, these natural ways of healing, are what the garden was all about. And this is really kind of the story of when you're out in the frontier, you figure out what works and you pass that on. And what Dr. Still figured out worked for us, Beth. And I want you to remember your diet, your exercise, your mental health, and if something gets twisted, get it untwisted, get your manipulation so the natural health and nutrition flows through the body and the waste comes out. He goes, you want to see a city go down quick? When the waste isn't picked up and that basically the sewage system is backed up, your city is not long. And in our own bodies, it's the same way. If the waste isn't removed and you're not in a good position for that, you're not destined for a long life.
Well, before we sign off, do you want to just remind people of the books that are available and how they can get those again? Yeah.
So basically, this was last year's book, and so we redo it every year. And so all you have to do is write to us at museum@atsu.edu. You just send us an email and say, hey, I'd like the book, and we can send them to Mesa. We can send them, you can come pick them up at the museum. We have hundreds of them. And again, it's a very generous gift of the Freeman Foundation, which every year gives us money for an intern to take care of the garden. And because Travis Freeman, he made his money on pole barns. Now, if you're from Missouri, a metal roof on basically stilts, it doesn't look like much, but if you got to put an animal in it or a tractor in it, they are amazing items. And so he kind of pioneered it and made a fortune. And so using that money, he does good deeds throughout the United States now that he's passed. But he always loved our garden. And his daughter, as the board member, continues to give us money to support the garden because she goes, Dad just loved it here. And you love it too. Come up and see us. If you're here on campus, go relax. pinch and sniff your way through. We give tours all the time. We're happy to tell you about the gardens, and that when you are on your own walks, you can learn about the wonderful healing properties of nature right here in your backyard.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jason. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. I love your stories. It's been a great time. I'm fortunate to get to spend a couple hours with them every month as we do our new employee orientation up here, and I love it every time. So thanks so much for coming to hang out with us. Thank you for viewing at home. Again, if you missed something, want to watch it again, we will have this available on our YouTube channel, so please check it out there or tell a friend about it. And thanks so much for your time, and have a great day at ATSU.